Hi there, I'm Marius, and today we are taking a look at how we can call custom APIs from PowerPages, something that is actually not supported by the OData API of PowerPages, but with the solution I will present you today, we can work around that. For calling custom APIs, we will first need this PowerPages Actions solution. You can get it via the link in the description. It links to a repository, and here in Solutions you will find the managed version of this solution. If you install that solution, it will grant you the Actions section down here. But first we will need to set up some things because this whole solution needs access via the OData API to work. So first we are going to table permissions. We need, here I've called it execute actions by the name, but the important thing is that the table PowerPages actions, we need read access to this table, and I've assigned here anonymous users, as it will grant every user of the PowerPage the right to perform actions. Also, we need to go to site settings. Down here at Web API, we need the two keys. We need to enable the PowerPages actions by setting its value to true. And we need to enable all fields. All fields, basically, it's actually not all fields that we need, but there's also no reason to hide something here because this entity is not designed to hold any records. And this entity is part of the solution. So it's right here, the action, PowerPages action. Before I show you the PowerPages action configuration, I will first show you another solution, and this solution right here, that's just a sample for my story in this video. So this is the VAT number validation solution. It's actually around this custom control right here, but it contains a custom API which we will call. And it's called ADC validate VAT. And it has one input, VAT, and three outputs, valid, name, and address. So let's take a look at the action configuration for this. The action configuration, so yeah, it's mapping to a custom API, ADC validate VAT, and then we assign it an operation name. I've assigned it here validate VAT, but you could also just say, okay, it's the same as the name of the custom API. That would be fine. But I've chosen to demonstrate this to have a different name. So, and then we can go into the Design Studio. I've set up a page here. You see one input, which will map to the input of the custom API, and three text fields, paragraphs, which will map to the outputs. In the HTML, so one input and three paragraphs, easy. And in the JavaScript, we are just calling the onload function of a separate JavaScript, so a web file, which I have here. And this web file reacts on change of the input and then builds an inputs object, which actually needs to be a dictionary of string to object. Just because custom APIs work this way with a named parameter and then a value of certain types, and those types are not unlimited actually, but I think most types, so something like GUID, integer, string, this is all allowed. Even lists of strings, for example, allowed. So, and then we are taking the value of the VAT input field and putting it into the VAT inputs property. Let me show you this again here in the VAT number validator solution. This was our custom API request parameter called VAT. And then we can call a function called actions call action. And for this to be called, we need to define it, of course, and it's defined in the actions.js. I will not go into detail right now about this. We will do that later. Just be aware this actions.js is actually part of the repository, so you just can take the code from here and copy it over. And what we also need for this to work is call action should be available, so we need the actions.js to be in our page. So we will include it right here as a script. And then, okay, call action, we have the operation, validate VAT. Let me show you this again in the action configuration here, validate VAT is set. Then our inputs with the VAT parameter. And then we have two functions, on success and on error, and where we will handle a positive result and a negative result. Positive result will just use valid name and address. And again, let me show you this in the solution. We had valid name and address as the outputs. So we will render these three outputs to the page, to the different paragraphs. And on error, well, there is not much to render, so I just reused the valid field to show the error. So for the error, there is maybe something you can take from this sample code. Errors happening in the PowerPages actions solution layer, so something that is included right here, for example, in this plugin package. Those errors or errors that are thrown by the actual custom API, so by this, are usually enclosed in a message. But if the error happens on a PowerPages level, so something like you've misconfigured something, then it will be in the outputs.error.message. So with the code out of the way, let's jump into the actual page. This is the page I showed you before in the design studio. I have my input. I will paste now VAT. And there we go. This VAT I got from the Microsoft Austria page because it's of Microsoft Austria. It's valid. We can take an invalid one maybe here as well. So this one is valid false and there is no name and address for in this case. So this works quite well. And if I remove everything here, we see an error response because the required field VAT was not there. And with a space, I can also provoke another error with an invalid input. That is passed from the actual API, so the ADC validate VAT, that returned this error right here. And now we can take a closer look what happens behind the scenes. So first let's take a look at actions.js. This takes the inputs, and in case you haven't, so you can either pass a stringified JSON on your own. That is actually with, if you have more complex objects, maybe think about something. You have a string parameter and you actually want to put in a serialized object in that. So yeah, you might want to put your inputs stringified on your own. Otherwise, if it's just a flat dictionary, you can also just pass the object and the call actions will serialize it for you. Then we are doing a GET request to PowerPages actions with the given operation. And if there are any inputs, might be that there is a custom API without inputs, just outputs, then there's a third filter here, which is created on is greater equals right now. This is a little bit special because the PowerPages, they do cache GET requests. And of course that is a very good thing because it's very good for the performance, but right here it would also be okay because given in a short time frame I make the same VAT request, yeah, okay, the results won't change, right? So that is totally fine to have it cached. but there might be custom APIs which are not a query like this, but more of a command. So they will have side effects in the system. And in this case, it would be really bad if the custom API is not actually executed, but just the returns are given from the cache. So this created on always changing because of the current time always changing makes sure that the caching is disabled in this case. And then your passed in on success and on error are not called directly, they are preprocessed. So for the success function, the actions.js parses out the outputs to an object, and based on the status code, we will see that in a second, decides was the execution successful or not. In case there is something like a network error or something, this is directly here in the error function. And for example, here there's also some pre-processing. If it's a 404 error, you have likely not configured these site settings, so the error function will point you to it directly. So how is this with on success and on error? Well, let's take a deeper look here into the executions we made earlier. So right here you have the request URL, but I will watch it in the payload because it's not escaped here. So we have the operation validate VAT and the inputs of this object. And in the response, let me go with preview here. We have the value. So this is a list of items because it's a retrieve multiple. And this list always contains one element. And we can see, here we have the inputs, the operation, and the outputs as a serialized object. And then we have the status code here indicating success. And notice also this has status code 200 OK. So let's take one where it hasn't worked. This one hasn't worked. The inputs is just an empty object because there was no VAT provided. And if we take a look at the response, we still have a 200 response with one entity inside, but this time the result or the status code is indicating an error. And in this case, we also get an object back as outputs with the message that the required field was missing. And this is passed out and given to you as the object you receive in the code. So in the code, let's take a look here at the VAT.js. Here we have the on error, and you can directly assume this is an object. And if we would look one step further, that would be, okay, how does the actual call to the custom API happen? And this is done here with the plugin assembly PowerPages actions adapter. I won't look into code right now because that would be too complex. Let's instead look at some traces. So we can see with the traces, let's first take one that was successful, this one here, So from the OData API of PowerPages, we receive a fetch XML, and it's first converted to a query expression, and then we can retrieve the action configuration. So you see right here we have given an operation of validate VAT, and by retrieving the configuration with that operation we can get, okay, we need to call ADC validate VAT. And then we can add the parameters. So the parameters are parsed from the inputs right here. So then the request is executed, and then the outputs are gathered. So this is name, address, and valid. And then they are finally serialized and given out in the outputs. With this outputs, this is thing. So this is a retrieve multiple plugin because we use the get request. Because we use the greater equals the current date, there should never be an output, right? Because it's impossible that the created on is greater than right now. That's just not happening. So, but anyways, the business entity collection we are giving out is replaced with one PowerPages action, which does not exist, right? So if we take a quick look at an output here again, this actually has a PowerPages action ID, so the ID parameter. But if you were to look into this PowerPages action, there it is simply not there. This is a fake one, so this whole entity is never designed to hold any records. It is just designed to be called with retrieve multiple, your inputs and an operation, and you will get the results back, and then they are gone, right? They are not persisted anymore. So after you configured your first PowerPages action and you successfully called it, every consecutive action is really easy. You just create the PowerPages action configuration, and then you call actions.callAction with your given operation and your inputs, and you react on the outputs. Of course, building the inputs and reacting on the outputs can be a bigger task, but from an infrastructure standpoint, it's really easy then. Still, it might not always be the perfect solution. Think about what you saw in the trace logs. We are making at least 2 calls for Dataverse. Think about what you saw in the trace logs. We are making at least 2 calls to Dataverse in. Think about what you saw in the trace logs. We are making at least 2 additional calls to Dataverse. One for converting the fetch XML to a query expression, and 2, we need to grab the configuration to make the mapping. The second call might not be necessary right now, but I'm planning on extending the solution to, for example, assign certain web roles to custom APIs so that not everyone with access to the portal can call all the custom APIs you publish via the actions configuration. And even though those 2 calls in a warmed up API are really quick, there's something like 30 milliseconds it is adding on, but it might be that this is problematic still because you have so many calls on this API. In that case, you can take the same concept and build your own entity where you directly implement your retrieve multiple on. That will improve the performance a little bit, but it will also oblige you to create the entity with probably the fields you are trying to input and output, and implementing a retrieve multiple plugin is more involved than just building a custom API. So based on the time investment, I think in most cases it's a good bet to work with such a generic solution. Just configure it and call it from the Power Page. And only in certain edge cases, like something that needs to be self-contained or something that really needs the most performance, you should implement on your own. Thanks for watching and see you next time.